Hey everyone, recently I was a guest on the Half the Picture podcast where myself and the show's host Billy Barnell ranked and discussed the 5 comic books that mean the most to us. During our conversation, we had an extended discussion about Jonathan Hickman and Esad Ribic's Secret Wars from 2015, and why I consider it to be not just my favourite event, but also a beautiful tribute to the Fantastic Four and the history of the Marvel Universe. I thought our chat about Secret Wars was really insightful, so I wanted to edit it together and post it here as a standalone video. If you enjoy this discussion, I highly advise checking out the full podcast episodes. I will leave links in the description, but for now, please enjoy this video on my thoughts on Secret Wars and why exactly I love this series so much. So sticking with the theme of kind of very modern leaning books, we could have done a whole episode on books from the 80s or books from the 90s or even books from the 50s. But given that this is kind of about my personal journey with comics, I've gone with mostly, if not exclusively, 21st century stuff. And this is technically it's the most recent of the list. This is now a book that's 10 years old. This is from a writer that we've not talked about yet, but is one of my favorite current day comic book writers, Jonathan Hickman, beautifully illustrated by the legendary Esad Ribic. This is Secret Wars.
Oh yes, which I haven't read, confession time, but I remember it coming out. I remember how big a deal it was. A big deal, wasn't it?
So obviously for anyone that's kind of in the comics world, Secret Wars will be a name that you're pretty familiar with, not just because there's like a movie coming out soon. Secret Wars was the name of a toy line and subsequent comic crossover that Marvel published in the mid-1980s. They did a line of action figures called Marvel Superhero Secret Wars, and to help sell these toys, they kind of just cobbled together an event in the comics with all of the characters that the toy line was going to feature. You know, Secret Wars is about an alien dude called the Beyonder takes, I think, like 10 heroes from the Marvel Universe and 10 villains, puts them on a planet he's made, and they have to fight to determine whether good is stronger than evil. It's a pretty flimsy plot. But it's a fun book. Like, it's one of the first times you see like Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four and the X-Men and the Avengers all on the same page. The most famous thing to come out of the original Secret Wars is that was where Spider-Man got the black symbiote costume for the first time. He gets that on Battleworld and brings it home. Yeah. And then, so it's kind of important in that regard that it's like you don't get Venom without Secret Wars. Flash forward 20 years later, Jonathan Hickman is kind of rising through the ranks as the next big Marvel writer. We talked about Bendis at the start of this show, kind of being the definitive Marvel writer of the 2000s. For my money, I would say Hickman might be the definitive Marvel writer of the 2010s. So Secret Wars was kind of like the culmination of Hickman's entire work at Marvel. It builds off themes and ideas established in his Fantastic Four run from the late 2000s, and then throughout his like 6-year run on Avengers and New Avengers. It introduces the idea of incursions and this kind of like ticking time bomb of the multiverse's destruction. And at the end of his Avengers run, all of reality is destroyed. And that leads into this book where we discover that Victor Von Doom has basically stolen the power of the gods and pieced together like the surviving fragments of different realities and created this like patchwork world called Battleworld. And it essentially is like this Game of Thrones, Tolkien-style feudal kingdom where different nation states and different kingdoms are different realities from the Marvel Universe. So there is like an Old Man Logan corner of the world. There is a Planet Hulk corner of the world. There is a corner of the world where it's the Marvel Universe, but if it was the Wild West. So it's this great like Frankenstein of different continuities. And at the crux of it, you have the main plot line of the series, which is God Emperor Doom. He runs this makeshift planet, and he's the only one that knows what the world was originally. Everyone else that is the world that they've always known. And you have, in the end of issue 1, you have a ship crashes on Battleworld, and it's a group of heroes that had survived the final incursion. And it then becomes, in this very grand and almost cosmic setting, it becomes this very personal story of Reed Richards versus Doctor Doom. And it's a battle of ideology, it's a battle of intellect, And it's a battle of which of these two men is going to shape the future of the Marvel Universe. And I love that because I am a huge Fantastic Four nerd. They are my favorite team in all of comics, and Reed Richards especially is a character that I deeply adore. But the Marvel Universe, as we know, obviously Marvel in some forms been around since the 30s, but I think most historians would agree that the Marvel Universe trademark begins in 1961 with the Fantastic Four issue 1. If the Fantastic Four isn't a hit, you don't get Spider-Man, you don't get the Avengers, you don't get the X-Men. Captain America is still in ice if you don't get that. So the Fantastic Four is a hugely significant title. It's a massive thing in comics. And at the time in which Secret Wars was being published, like I said, Hickman had done a pretty acclaimed 4-year run on the Fantastic Four. Only a few years later, Marvel cancelled the Fantastic Four's book. So at the time Secret Wars was happening, the Fantastic Four did not have a comic.
Right.
And that was the first time they'd ever not had an ongoing series. And
wow. Why did they cancel it? Was it just because of sales, or?
I think the official line Marvel gave was sales, but it was very transparently because of the movie rights situation with Fox. Because this was around the same time where the X-Men comics weren't really being pushed and Marvel were really trying to tell you the Inhumans were a big deal. I think with X-Men, even though that period of their comics wasn't great and they weren't kind of major players, X-Men still sold enough that they couldn't justify cancelling the books. An X-Men comic will always sell X amount of copies, no pun intended, because it's the X-Men. The Fantastic Four didn't have that kind of cushion, so they kind of got chopped for a few years. So so Secret Wars kind of means a lot to me in that regard, because it is kind of like, it feels like it was written to be the last great Fantastic Four story in the event that Marvel never let them back in, essentially. But it also works as kind of a full circle moment for the Marvel Universe, that this is, because, all of reality's been destroyed. Technically, at this point, Earth 616 does not exist. The world that Stan and Jack created in the tiny office in New York is gone. And there's something really poignant about these two characters, who are two of the first characters that really brought Marvel back in a big way, being the ones that essentially at the end of Secret Wars have to have this ideological chess battle to determine the future of the universe. And obviously, it's a big event comic. You have a huge battle with multiversal variants. Doctor Doom essentially has his own Green Lantern army of different variants of Thor. So you get to see Thors from different realities all fight the Avengers. And there's a very famous panel where Doctor Doom rips Thanos' spine out. And you get great moments where Miles Morales and Peter are working together. And there's a great moment in the second to last issue where Black Panther wields the Infinity Gauntlet, which is burned into my brain because it's awesome. But it's not just that, it's also a very personal and poignant story about these two men, Reed and Doom, who have not only so much of a personal history together, but symbolize so much of what Marvel is as a brand. And the ending of Secret Wars is so beautiful to me, where spoiler alert, Reed basically forces Doom to admit that he would have been able to save the world if he had the power that Doom had harnessed. But Secret Wars has this beautiful ending where, because like I said, Secret Wars doesn't end and a new Fantastic Four series starts. They still don't come back for another 3 or so years.
Wow.
I think Dan Slott launches the Fantastic Four's next series in 2018, 2019. This is the summer and the fall of 2015. So there's still a big gap before they ever come back. And it ends with this beautiful moment where Reed reunites with Sue and their children, Franklin and Valeria. They've remade Earth 616. And then as a family, they're going to jet out into the universe and repopulate the multiverse. They're going to go from planet to planet, galaxy to galaxy, and not only restore all these worlds and universes, but also catalogue everything, because the Fantastic Four are, at their core, they're scientists and they're explorers more than they are superheroes. So they jet off on this family holiday into the stars. And it's essentially if the Fantastic Four never come back, this is as perfect an ending as you could give them. That they are off in the distance, exploring the unknowns of the universe, always just out of reach, but there when we need them. And I think that's such a beautiful thing. And I feel like I shouldn't tell you the full ending because it will spoil it, but the last page of this book just gives me chills every time, where we see we go back to 616 and it's kind of narrated by Reed, and it ties into a speech Reed gives in the first issue of New Avengers that Hickman wrote, where Reed So in the Fantastic Four series, Reed discovers the concept of incursions. He discovers that realities are colliding into each other and it's triggering this multiversal bomb. And then in New Avengers, Reed presents this to the Illuminati. So he presents it to Captain America and Iron Man and Professor Xavier and Black Bolt and Black Panther, all of the smartest minds of the universe. The speech Reed gives in New Avengers is he tries to explain the incursions in the simplest way possible, where he says, basically, everything dies. There is no fighting it. There is no stopping it. This is a universal constant. We cannot stop the end of everything. So Secret Wars ends with Reed giving a speech to Sue and the kids, where he's talking about entropy and he's talking about how everything lives and how there's always a tomorrow. And as you see all of the people kind of go back to normal, we cut to Latveria. We see Victor take off the mask and reveal that his face is fixed. And that's something that Reed had intentionally done. That's one of the small changes he'd made to reality. Essentially saying, let's put everything behind us and just this is a fresh start. This is our historic feud from 1961 to now is over. And this is me extending the olive branch. And it ends with just this really beautiful moment of Victor smiling on his balcony as the Fantastic Four jet off into the stars. And like I said, if the Fantastic Four never came back after this story, as much as I love them and I love the current stuff, this would be as fitting it's almost like if All Star Superman was the last Superman story.
Yeah, I'm getting that.
This is just such a poignant and perfect end to these characters at a time when people, even people that worked at Marvel, didn't legitimately know what their future was. And these are such historically significant and important characters. And you don't get a lot of instances in mainstream comics to give characters endings. And
no.
While nothing ever ends, and obviously the Fantastic Four are back now, at the time, this was a hugely powerful story and a real celebration of the Fantastic Four, packaged in a very, very fun and exciting event story. So that's why that's my final pick.
Wow. And you talk about it very eloquently, Owen, and you make me want to read it, as you have done with all of the comics that even the ones I've already read, you make me want to read them again because I remember that event comic coming out, but I think Cataclysm was kind of the end of my sort of love affair at the time with sort of buying a comics every month from off the stands for a bit. So I did Cataclysm, and it wasn't because I disliked it. I did that, and then I kind of lost track of okay, where am I supposed to be now with Miles? I was following that story, and where am I supposed to be? So I missed this one when it came out, but obviously it's going to be, it sounds like it's going to be the inspiration for the next Avengers movie. They obviously, Marvel listened to and are aware of the quality of it in terms of this is sounds like a very respectable book in the eyes of the readers and fans and critics. So they're making it the basis of the next movie. And as you say, it's hard to end comics. Doing an actual what could be a fitting ending to a mainstream super comic is, I think, nearly in some ways impossible. And in fact, going back to Grant, it's just a consequence of being trapped in myth. It's your stories, you never age, and your stories are recycled for generations upon generations. And Superman has been around longer than me, you, or Grant, and will be going long after we're gone. So and in Grant's eyes, that means Superman is kind of the most real of all of us. And I guess the same thing with the Fantastic Four. They are the foundation stone of the Marvel universe as we know it. And how can you end that? How can you actually do a fitting ending? And it sounds like Hickman, from what you describe, I mean, I'm as you're describing that, I'm seeing that in my head, and I'm seeing it sounds fantastic. No pun intended, fantastic. And and it's interesting because what you said about Doom, sort of that ending of Doom's face being sort of fixed, because it reminds me of what Kirby said about Doom. I remember there's a great quote from him where he basically says that in his mind, when he drew Doom only had I don't know if this is carried over to all the different variations.
It's just
Doom,
a
tiny little scar, and all it took was that tiny little imperfection to basically bring down this sort of great man into the realm of vanity and, like you say, inferiority.
Well, there's a great moment in, I think, one of the early issues of Secret Wars. So in this reality, Sue is married to Doom, and the children are Doom's. So he has essentially stolen Reed's life on top of everything else. And there's a really great moment early on where Doom is having this heart-to-heart with Sue and he takes the mask off. He is more scarred and disfigured than he's usually presented as. I remember at the time thinking, oh, okay, it's just to just kind of make Doom look gross. But actually there's something really thematically rich about that idea that in the normal continuity, Doom is someone that had a slight blemish, essentially, and then willingly disfigured themselves by putting this hot metal mask on them because they were so vain they couldn't live with the idea that they had this slight imperfection. And this idea that like Doom has the power of the gods. He can do anything. He can bend reality at his will. And yet he makes himself look more disfigured because that's how he sees himself. And then counteract that with what Reed does at the end of that book, where Reed sees him as a person. He doesn't see him, despite everything that they've been through together and all the horrible things Doom has done to the Fantastic Four. He still sees him as Victor, the guy that he grew up with and he went to school with and he was best friends with. It sums up that book perfectly of the reveal of Doom's face when he has the power. And then when Reed has the power where he looks like Michael Shannon, weirdly enough.
Maybe that was the visual inspiration. I'll have to check this out because, again, like DC New Frontier, I wasn't familiar with it, and I'm only sporadically familiar with Hickman's work, in the sense that the main thing of his I read was, I think I read a bit of his Fantastic Four run, and I read a good chunk of his Ultimates run because that was coming out obviously at the same time as the New 52 and Ultimate Spider-Man. So I remember my sort of best friend who I read comics with was reading the Ultimates and I was reading Ultimate Spider-Man, so we would swap over issues and I would read the stuff with the maker. And I do remember being very impressed by it in terms of like, it did feel, it was very cerebral but also and intelligent, but also it read like a cracking monthly 24-page adventure comic. And so I really should dip into Hickman proper. It's something, it's a guy that I'm not really familiar with.
Obviously, Secret Wars is built out of his Fantastic Four and his Avengers run, but I think like stylistically it is very comparable to his Ultimates. Not just because it's the same artist, Esad Ribic, who drew his Ultimates run, also draws Secret Wars. Hickman is one of my favourite current day writers, and Secret Wars is up there with anything he's ever written. He doesn't do as much creator-owned work now as I'd like because he's so kind of busy with, he's been like the main architect of Marvel's Ultimate Revival for the last 2 or 3 years. And been writing Ultimate Spider-Man, and he's just wrapped this like cosmic story called Imperial. Check out Secret Wars, and if you like that, check out something like The Black Monday Murders or The Manhattan Project.
Cool. Oh no, I'll check those out.